So one feature of the modern day that is completely new in human history is just the amount of information coming our way. In this video, I'm going to be laying out an argument that social media platforms and social media algorithms have trained our brains to label and dismiss information that is too new or too threatening or too different from our worldviews. That's good for social media platforms, and it's actually something that's somewhat necessary in the sense that we have to have a way of dealing with the fire hose of information that's coming our direction. So it's not entirely bad, and some of the labeling and dismissing is labeling and dismissing that should happen. But I'm going to make the argument that that's starting to affect our relationships in the real world in a negative way. So first of all, we do have a constant influx of information, unlike anyone throughout history. If you rewind 100 years and look at how much information do people consume in their lifetimes through the newspapers or through conversations or whatever, probably the same amount of information that we would consume in a week was what they would consume in a whole lifetime. And people have started calling this a fire hose of information and misinformation, and I think that's a really good term for it because we can't possibly take all of that in. So economists like to think about scarce resources. Time is a scarce resource, but so is cognitive energy. You can't be engaging cognitively at a high level all day long. There's sort of only a certain number of hours per day that you can do that. So you have to decide, how am I going to spend my cognitive effort, and which pieces of information that are new or surprising or threatening am I going to spend my thinking time thinking about? So given that, let's think about this from the social media algorithms' perspectives. And the algorithms are given one task, which is to maximize engagement. Now, engagement has different formats. There's different ways of measuring engagement. There's time on platform, number of clicks, number of likes, number of thumbs up signs. There's different ways of measuring engagement, and the algorithms are just given a multitude of pieces of information about our engagement and the way that engagement gets monetized, and they're just told to maximize profits. So the algorithms themselves don't have negative intentions, but they're going to sort of go through this guess and check process. And it's an evolutionary process where the beliefs of the algorithm get updated and get improved over time as they see how different guess and check techniques work out. So how does that relate to this fire hose of information? Well, the fire hose is actually going to create a paradox, I think, for these algorithms. On one hand, when people constantly have information coming at them, and especially if that information is threatening, which a lot of it might be if you want people engaged, if you want them to click, if you want them worried and spending time on the platform to sort of assuage their worries, threatening information might actually accomplish that. So on one hand, it's good to give them lots of information because that is how you keep them engaged. On the other hand, this much information can be overwhelming to people in a way such that they just shut down the platform, disengage, and don't want to deal with all of this constant threatening information. As a matter of fact, we do see people who take breaks from social media. That's becoming a more common thing, and it's probably a pretty good trend. But right now we're thinking about the social media algorithm's perspective, and the algorithm doesn't want them to disengage. So how does the algorithm balance out giving people information, including some threatening information, or information that's different from their own worldview, and still keeping them on the platform? Well, here's my hypothesis. I think the social media algorithms have figured out through a guess and check process that if they give us the cognitive armor to encounter that much information so that we can dismiss information easily that we don't want to deal with, then that keeps us engaged for longer while still throwing all this useful information at us that keeps us on the platform. And just to be clear, I do think it is absolutely necessary for us to figure out which information to dismiss. And there's different ways of doing that. I'm probably going to do another video on sort of the economics behind cost-benefit analysis for good and bad techniques for doing that. For example, you could outsource the curation of your information to experts. You could outsource the curation of information to crowds, maybe a certain type of crowd, like people like you. You could decide what to dismiss or not dismiss based on how the headline made you feel. Or you could come up with a more complicated set of rules for which types of information to dismiss or not dismiss. And you could be thoughtful about that. And being thoughtful about that is probably good and necessary, and we probably actually do need to come up with better techniques for figuring out what new, potentially worldview changing information do we actually spend time thinking through. So that's something I'll talk about in another video. This video is really about how does this cognitive armor stuff work? Well, let's think through what cognitive armor might look like. It's basically a label and dismiss. You want sort of a series of labels that you have in your back pocket that you can just sort of stamp the label on a headline that's threatening and just say, nope, that's invalid, I'm not going to think about it, nope, that's an issue. And there's all kinds of labels that'll work for this. Drama queen, overly sensitive, conspiracy theory, that person has a horse in the race, that's pseudoscience, that's motivated reasoning, that's biased, that's ignorant, that's a self-serving perspective, that person's pretending to be more important than they are, that person's not a real authority, that person's too old to understand, that person's too young to understand. I mean, you could go on and on. You kind of get the idea. There's these sort of labels where if we encounter something that we don't want to be true or that would really upset our worldview in some way, we just have labels to slap it on that headline, and then it's gone, it's dismissed, and then we can move on into our interaction with social media that we like to encounter in a way that's more comfortable and more fulfilling. And it's worth noting that this can be done by just you applying the label to the headline you don't like, or it can be done where maybe you don't feel fully comfortable dismissing that headline, but you have sources that are kind of within your own worldview that if you go to those sources, you can find someone who will dismiss that headline fast enough for you. So this can come from you, or it can come from experts who do the labeling and dismissing for you so that you're more comfortable and more secure in your labeling and dismissing of new information that challenges your worldview. Alright, now I'm going to talk about 3 problems with this, and the first one is the one that I'm most worried about, which is that I think people are using this a lot to dismiss people in their lives. And when we shut people down too much or too often, it can cause us to sort of not want to share, and that closes out the possibility of intimacy in a way that's more profound than I think we're aware of at this moment. So if the social media platform is going to train our brain to dismiss by perhaps giving us experts who dismiss, and we sort of pick up the thought patterns of those experts, then we kind of do this automatically. Oh, nope, that's a bad piece of information, shut it down, we're done. However, when you're with a person face to face, looking them in the eye, and they share something that's been on their mind, which might be something that they read on social media and have been thinking about, and if you encounter that piece of information with that real human being in the same way you encounter that piece of information if it were in your newsfeed, by sort of labeling it, dismissing it, done, the person in front of you is going to feel shut down. They're going to feel dismissed. And depending on the label that you label that piece of information, they might feel like you're treating them with contempt. If it's sort of like, oh, that's stupid, oh, that's overly sensitive or exaggerated, people are gonna feel dismissed as a person by that. And what do you do when you feel dismissed or when you feel someone's treating you with contempt? Well, there's 2 basic responses. One is that you treat them with contempt back. There's something about contempt that sort of invites more contempt such that it escalates. So that's one thing that's happening. I think the thing that's actually happening more often though is that people, they shut down, they say, you know what, I'm not gonna share what I'm thinking about, I'm not gonna share what's on my heart, because then I'm gonna be dismissed as a person, my thoughts, my experiences are gonna be dismissed, so I'll just not even try to share, with anyone unless I know that they have a similar way of interacting with information such that they're not going to shut me down. Because vulnerability is risky. And when we try to be vulnerable with our thoughts and fears and we're dismissed like that, it's just really easy to go into hiding. So there's this book I read recently by Vivek Murthy. It's called Together. And the book basically makes an argument that people need other people. We need these social relationships, but we're not getting them. There's a lot of loneliness out there. And he talks a lot about sort of situations where you put people together and they interact well and they thrive. But I don't think it's that simple. I think a lot of times you put people together and sometimes they feel even more lonely. So just getting people in the same room doesn't seem to quite work. And I think part of that is that this dismissing of people is happening so frequently that unless you have a very well-matched social media feed and way of dismissing information with someone, you end up shutting down and not wanting to share, and then in some ways kind of acting fake with those people, which is the opposite of intimacy. So that's the first problem with this sort of cognitive armor, that I do think we're being trained in an almost Pavlovian way by social media algorithms. The second problem with this cognitive armor that requires us to have easy ways of labeling and dismissing information we don't want is that we're going to seek out experts who are going to help us label and dismiss, because then we can sort of soothe the fears that might otherwise come up as we're interacting with so much information. That means that the social media figures who end up being most successful might be those who are really good at labeling and dismissing information that would be new to your worldview, or information that might make us feel uncomfortable. But of course, we realize that sometimes really important information is uncomfortable, is the type of information we might want to dismiss. And if we build up habits of dismissing that type of information, we're not going to see the world in an accurate way. So I am really worried that the types of people who will be really successful on social media will be people who are good at convincingly dismissing information that would be threatening to people's worldviews. I guess I could say more about that, but this video is probably long enough, so I'll stop. But I really hope that this has gotten you thinking about how might social media algorithms train our brains to interact with their platforms in a way where we can encounter this constant influx of information without getting too overwhelmed by it. And I do think there are good and healthy ways of sifting through information, but that the financial incentives of the algorithms might be not the best. Having a more healthy and strategic way of sort of encountering a new piece of information and being like, actually, is this one that I need to think more deeply about and perhaps even update my own beliefs? Or is this something that I really should dismiss and not give another second thought to? So I'll do a video on approaches for that as well.